We've got a fantastic panel. The panel's called Star Tech Enterprise, and suitably enough, we've got a set of stars for you today. We have, to my right, they've all got very impressive resumes. I'm going to try not to forget any of them by reading off my phone. This is Karina Narmi, rhymes with army, she told me, a rising star of British biotech. Karina is founder and CEO of Helix Nano. She attended Singularity University, which, for those of you who don't know, is this incredible place on a NASA base in California, right in the middle of Silicon Valley. Then we've got Jamal Edwards. Jamal is, as I'm sure all of you know, one of Britain's most successful young entrepreneurs. He revolutionized the music industry with his YouTube channel SBTV, which broke acts like Ed Sheeran. Scarily enough, Jamal pointed out to me at the beginning, when we bumped into each other today, that he started SBTV 10 years ago when he was 14, which is pretty damn impressive. We have Catherine Parsons, co-founder and CEO of Decoded, a technology education company teaching code, data, and hacking to thousands of professionals worldwide and changing entire industries while she's at it. Julie Meyer, founder and CEO of Adrian Capital and author of Welcome to Entrepreneur Country. I think we're in the middle of Entrepreneur Country right here. And of course, we have with us Ronan, who can introduce himself very well as the CEO of O2, powering so much of what's good in the modern economy. So let's kick off maybe with you, Julie. There's a lot of talk right now about startups. So it used to be the case in Britain that we were worried that we didn't have enough of an entrepreneurial culture, enough of a fear to fail. Do you think maybe the pendulum swung too far? What do you think about this, the craze around startups right now?
Well, it was great to see Martha here just a couple minutes ago, because the very first internet deal that I did was helping getting Brent and Martha funded. We did the first 6 million sterling investment in them in 1998. And it's true that when new media investors put in the money, and then when we raised that next round with and for them, there weren't a lot of lastminute.coms out there that were competing, and they were so spectacular and exceptional anyway. But I think the important point about your question is, have we shifted to a different stage of the game? And a lot of our thinking at Ariadne Capital and our whole ecosystem economics methodology is really based on the work of Carlota Perez. And I really encourage, if you don't know who Carlota Perez is, you should actually, if you're in the room. Because what she says is that this is not about disruptive technology at all. That moment was about 1970, and every 60 to 80 years, the same thing happens, which is really kind of reassuring, because it means you don't have to understand the cosmos, you just actually have to read history. We're in the second half of the cycle where non-technology incumbents and technology players are pulling those derivative technologies in and embedding them. So we move from a moment of big bang, microprocessor, all that stuff, to a new common sense. So it's true that there's a huge competition of those digital enablers to get into partnership with the O2s and all of the other big companies right now. It's hard to say if it's too many.
And Jamal, you were one of the youngest people ever to get an MBE, services to entrepreneurship and music. What's your take on starting a company and growing a company?
I think the biggest thing for me when I was 15 was that I didn't really have the infrastructure to sort of take it to the next level. But now I'm sort of learning and getting all the sort of help from government and different grants and finding the right team around me to actually take it to the next level past what I've got already. But I think when I'm now going to schools and speaking to the kids, the biggest thing that I talk to them about is like tax, VAT, and learning how to register your company, because that's the biggest thing that we don't get taught in school, and that's the biggest thing that can also affect your business. But now it's just about putting the right team around me. But when I first started off, it was quite daunting, because there wasn't anything out there that I could try and find to help me grow SBTV, so I just learned it all from the internet.
Yeah. How to hoodwink the tax man should be on the credit. Karina, you've worked and built companies in America and the UK. What would you say is the the sort of difference in between these two scenes? How different is it?
Wow, that's a big question. Many differences. I originally grew up in London, but my first experience of being an entrepreneur was in San Francisco. And I learned a lot from the culture there. There's a real open sharing of ideas, so people aren't scared to talk about their ideas. They understand that ideas are plentiful, but execution is hard. And that open sharing creates this real community where people help each other out. People are much less risk averse, as we've heard over and over again. They understand that failure is really experience and learnings that can be applied to the next venture. There's also, I think, one of the difficulties in the UK is around capital, is around funding. So last year, startups in the UK raised about $7 billion. Startups in the US raised about $40 billion. That's a very, very big difference. It is improving here, so I think this year saw a 40% growth on last year. But until companies in the UK have the kind of aggressive firepower that they need to expand globally and to make really big, risky bets, it's going to be hard for us to compete.
But given the UK, the American economy and population is, 4-5 times bigger than the UK's. Is that gap
well,
as serious?
I'm very
as
ambitious for the UK because we're English speaking, so we can address this global market. We have incredible technical universities. There's a great deal of talent here that I think is being underutilized. And we could really be a global power in terms of the digital revolution and being a big part of that picture, punching bigger than our population size, but making use of the fact that we sit in a very unique position.
So we've heard from Julie on the sort of startup culture right now and the change in equilibrium. Jamal about how things seem to have got easier for people to build companies, but also maybe just now that there's still some way to go. Catherine, if you were in government right now, what things would you do to try and move the needle to help?
It's been a kind of amazing experience. 3 years ago, I think if you told your parents that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, they'd look horrified. Whereas at least now, there seems to be a kind of a sense of entrepreneurship being a good thing, and actually the environment being less risky than it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. A lot of people putting a lot of effort into creating incubator spaces and digital resources that can tell you where to go to raise money. But I think it's just the beginning. We've travelled to about 40 different cities teaching coding in the last year, and actually got a real flavour as we've been going around the globe of kind of where does the UK sit within the context of entrepreneurship, and actually I think it's one of the best places to start a business, but there's so much more that can be done in terms of really believing that globally world-changing businesses can be born out of the UK. So continue to invest in digital skills, as Martha said, that are coming out of our universities, but also at that career change stage of people's lives. So when they're 7, when they're 17, when they're 27, when they're 70, and continue to create an environment that is frictionless when it comes from idea right through to investment, right through to execution, so that anyone who has an idea that can scribble it down on a piece of paper knows what avenue and what journey they can go on to make that a reality.
Thanks. Ronan, you run one of the biggest companies around. Does all this talk of startups and startups being more innovative than big companies and whatever, does that annoy you? Do you think that's true?
Not at all. As the founders of one of the most successful incubators in the world, in Wyra, we're more than happy to be part of the equation. I think the exam question is, if we look at the UK and what's happened over the last few years, you've seen a doubling in the number of accelerator and incubator programs in the UK between 2011 and 2014. We've also seen that the statistics of businesses that go through those, we did research last year, says they're 12% more likely to survive. That's between 78% approximately of an ordinary startup that hasn't been through, and 90% for those who go through. And they also raise more money in their early rounds. I think the challenge that we have is from startup to scale up, and I think that's where the markets in the US are definitely more mature in my view. So I think we have two challenges in the UK at the moment, as I would see it. We have a real north-south divide we have to address. More than 2/3 of the programs are based in the southeast and predominantly based in London. I think some of the current government's policies around a northern powerhouse might help us to shift some of the balance of that. And then I think the second thing is, how do we move from startup to scale up? And I think that's where corporates can help. One of the interesting growth areas is 12% of the programs that are in the UK now are actually corporate sponsored programs. And Julie and I were just talking as we came in, having the opportunity for a startup to work with a big established business may be part of the secret of how they scale up.
Very, very different cultures interacting between startup and big company. How do you possibly have two such different entities communicating properly? What's the trick to making that work?
In our case, we're very clear. We keep our Wayra startup outside the business, but we give it all the access it wants to the business. And I think that's quite an important principle. It stands alone, but has access to whatever it wants. And what we aspire to do is to find the next Facebooks and whatever, as everybody else does. But we also want to cross-fertilize back into our own business and rediscover how big companies can be innovative.
So I actually have first-hand experience of that with Helix Nano. We're working with Johnson & Johnson, which is a massive pharmaceutical company, of course. And it's all about setting up the right structure where, as the startup, you can take what you need from that environment without feeling vulnerable or without kind of giving away your secret sauce. And I think a lot of big companies are realizing that innovation is coming increasingly from outside of their own entities, and they need to create this open campus type of environment where both can benefit.
I mean, Julie, you've worked with a lot of companies to help them go from startup to scale up. I mean, what are the barriers that are still there preventing more companies just keeping velocity?
A lot of established businesses really need to understand that their chief asset could be their customers. They have the ability to provide distribution, audience, reach, and no venture capitalist is going to give them 50 million euros, sterling, dollars, whatever, to build that audience, reach, etc., distribution. And so really what you have is startups, which are revenue generating algorithms. They understand something about how to make money in the future. They're cars. They need a highway. And so the way to construct it is put the car on the highway. But the challenge is, and this is where it gets tricky, is that most of those highways are the digital players out in the valley. And in the world which has gone from analog to digital, we're no longer living in a linear world, we're living in an exponential world. If you're running, put your big company in the box, and if you're not living in an exponential growth world, in a digital world, you're getting further and further behind from the competition. So if you're bank number one and you think you compete with bank number two, you don't. You actually compete with Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, Uber, Airbnb, and so forth, which are living in a networked world driven by exponential growth. So the real problem is actually the UK and Europe are creating supernova exits. Are entrepreneurs cashing out to US technology firms and making bundles of money to go buy houses in Hampstead? Yes, they are. That's good. Are the ecosystems, which are where the network effects go, which is why Apple is worth nearly $1 trillion, are those ecosystems, platform companies with network effects, anywhere close to becoming more based in the UK? Sadly, it's getting much worse. So just as we're cashing out to US technology firms, because the dirty little secret is most of the European venture community has really only one play in their playbook, and that's to figure out which US technology firm they're going to sell you to. If we could get the banks and the Royal Mail and the telcos and the retailers to really take seriously that they have to become platforms with network effects, we could start to move the dial.
Catherine, which US tech company do you want to sell your company to?
You're asking me all the challenging questions you had.
Well, I know you'll rise to the challenge.
The experience of America has been fascinating because there is a kind of culture about entrepreneurship that is, very kind of go-get it. And that scale element, I'm not sure we could have started the business anywhere but here, weirdly. In terms of talent, in terms of taking that kind of leap, and in terms of the kind of sheer eccentricity of it as well. But in terms of scaling, America does kind of dangle a lot of kind of very tempting things at an entrepreneur. And Jamal, I know that you're looking at kind of scaling self-belief around the world, and we were just chatting about it before. And but it's not just America. We're also opening in Asia as well. So that is a very fascinating market for.
Jamal, shouldn't you be in LA, New York, San Fran right now? What are you doing here in
I
London?
get asked to go to San Fran quite a lot, but I haven't been yet. But one of my next aims is to take it to South Africa and LA. But when I went to Beijing for a week, I had people in Asia saying, "We want your content. We love Western culture, but in China you're not allowed YouTube. So can we take some of your videos and then spread it out there?" So that's like another avenue that I want to go down. But I always keep that sort of UK mantra with me. It's just like sort of trying to showcase people before it gets to the mainstream media. That's like my main thing. Yeah.
And there's a sort of view that starting a company is morally superior. There's something about the agency of starting your own company, taking on old industries. Do you feel that with what you're doing, that there's a kind of a bigger mission?
I never say it, but everyone always says that I was taken on MTV, and I always aspired to be like MTV when I was a little bit younger. But now it's now I just want to keep on building a platform that can just grow to beyond belief. Like I just hit 300 million views on my channel, so now I want to take it to like 500 million and 1 billion and keep on building it and take it to other places. But I don't have any aims in saying, I'm going to be better than this company or I'm taking over. It's just sort of just to keep on building.
It's a theme in a lot of conversations about tech, this London versus Silicon Valley question. And clearly all clusters are different and so on. But what do you think it would take for London to really move ahead in that kind of global race to be the innovation centre?
So there are several aspects, but speaking from my experience, because Helix Nano is a health tech company and I deal in the sort of world of deep technology and science, I think one of the things that we really need to get better at is commercializing some of the amazing IP that's coming out of our universities. So I saw an amazing statistic that you can track back almost half of the revenue in Silicon Valley to companies that came out of Stanford. And when you're there, you realize that Stanford is actually the powerhouse of Silicon Valley. And in the UK, we have a bunch of brilliant universities generating a great deal of IP, but I think last year we filed for 0.2% of patents globally. That's not good enough. And the commercial terms that universities give here are much, much worse. So when students want to spin out companies and become entrepreneurs, the universities are not being long-term greedy, as they call it in the US. They're not thinking long-term. They're taking a big chunk up front and sort of strangling these startups before they even get off the ground. But it is improving.
There's another great stat in that space that Stanford University attracts more private investment each year than Oxford, Cambridge and Imperial combined, which I think sort of shows how open Stanford is, I think, to doing business. Ronan, as a big company, are you doing much with British universities? How does that work for you?
I'm actually going to Stanford on Sunday week, so that might say something.
So what's going wrong?
Look, I think one of the things we have to think about is whether or not we want to cover all bases or whether we want to place some bets. And I think one of the developments that we've seen in the incubator and innovator space recently has been the development of some deeper tech spaces, and whether it be edtech, fintech, medtech. I think there's some evidence the British economy has significantly benefited from industrial policy in the last phase. I think we want a kind of a digital sector policy in this phase and actually try and be champions at a number of these things rather than come second or third in lots of things.
I mean, so these are, opportunities and challenges. Women in technology is a big, big question. And, I mean, Catherine, do you think there's an obstacle? Do you think there's something
Well, I'm really
going
glad
on?
that you mentioned it, because there are lots of women on this stage, there are lots of women in the audience, but as Martha said, it is a crisis. And if you believe, like Ronan said, that technology has changed everything, and that we need to change as human beings, our society needs to move with that shift. Women cannot get left behind in that. And I certainly feel that I hear a phrase that women's brains don't work that way when it comes to technology. I hear that every single week. Can you imagine something else that you would say that about? We've looked at the difference between men and women and their ability to code. There's no difference in computational thinking, but there's a huge difference in confidence.
So you train, thousands of people in coding, train men and women. Women do just as well as men on your courses.
I can't believe you're even asking this question.
You raised it.
Yes, this is not number one, it's not magic, and there is something about technology that feels like it's magic. The thing that's affecting the entire world cannot be owned by 1%. Women need to be coding the products that are increasingly changing our lives and affecting businesses, and they need to be founding those businesses as well. And a pretty damning bit of research is about to come out for the launch of London Technology Week about the state of women in technology in London. And you could look at that really negatively or set an ambition that the UK could potentially be the best place in the world when it comes to women and technology. But we need female VCs. I think there are 6 female partner VCs in Europe.
True. No, that's not true. I think Mike Butcher said something around on Tech First, and I thought, just because he doesn't know who they are doesn't mean that there's not about 6 dozen. So I could give you a list of the female partners.
Well,
there's fewer female VCs who are partners that have set up their own firm, but the money is there in the hands of the women and so forth. But it's true, we back about 40% women in our venture fund, and we're not trying, right? We're just simply doing that.
I'm almost certain, and I would love to create some visibility about this, that there is generally a belief that women's ideas aren't as big or ambitious and change the world-ish. And I hear that a lot. I mean, being a founder of a business.
The important thing, though, is that, and I'm sure everybody in this room doesn't need, convincing about this, you never win by playing by somebody else's rules. Ever, ever. This whole concept of breaking through somebody else's glass ceiling, own the glass ceiling, right? Then if you want to break through it, if you want to make a new glass ceiling, whatever you want to do, but own the glass ceiling. That's why we should be encouraging women to set up their own business rather than trying to get on the boards of public companies. It just honestly is not the route to fulfillment of any kind. But the world is becoming feminine. It really is. So if you take all of the good characteristics, transparency, group collaboration, and call them feminine, right? They're becoming increasingly important in management and leadership.
I think something like only 11% of Silicon Valley executives are women. Do you think this is an area where London really could definitively beat the Valley by being a much more equal, fair place than California?
I mean, absolutely. In a way, we are starting with more of a blank canvas. So we could set the terms and we could set the agenda. There are a lot of women in Silicon Valley, but you notice that they are in peripheral sort of roles, less so in technical and decision-making roles and more so in supporting roles. And I think it would be great to change that.
I mean, at Second Home, we started with a blank canvas, and almost half of the CEOs and founders there are women. So it shows you can do it. I mean, Jamal, with what you're seeing on YouTube, and the different ways in which people can express themselves, how do you think sort of diversity is coming to life in your world?
I find being diverse via content is just by the people I film. So if I do a video with Little Mix or Ed Sheeran, I'll get an influx of females on the channel, but then it's just about keeping them in the channel, in the ecosystem, and then once they're in the ecosystem, I've then had them apply for jobs, and then now a social media manager at SBTV, predominantly it was a male that was doing it, but now it's a female doing it, and that was because they watched the channel, and it was just me expanding the sort of remit of music that I actually put out on the channel.
Fantastic. Well, I could talk to these guys all day. I'm probably going to, but we're just about out of time here. We've talked about everything from women to London to what's wrong and what's right. I've accidentally maybe offended Catherine, and sorry about that. But it's been a fascinating conversation, so thank you all, and thank you to the great panellists.